Yeah, I'm cool.
But the idea is that is to make these videos, and I'm also going to extract the audio from them available for others to see who might be coming into this a little bit later in the process, or who might not be able to be here right now, but want to follow along. We're at this stage where we're developing a nucleus, or perhaps we already have a nucleus and we're developing the first cluster of cells, which has this genetic blueprint that I've been talking about and writing about, and which we've begun manifesting through projects such as metapsychosis and book clubs that we've done. But now we're in this phase of growing the organism, of growing this embryo or this zygote into a fetus, and then ultimately giving birth to it. And so these are kind of steps along the way. And for me, they're an opportunity to get my ideas out and to get feedback on them. But I hope that for everybody that is participating in this, it's an opportunity to see where they might feel a resonance or feel a particular attraction and want to contribute, want to help kind of grow some aspect of the project. So what I would like to do in terms of an agenda for today is take a few minutes and just introduce ourselves and check in a few minutes on that. And then from there, I'd like to talk relatively briefly, on kind of a part two, a follow-up to the meeting last week, and then invite your reflections and responses, and then open it up from there. I think it's going to take a few meetings, and it's going to take more, basically more time and more conversations to really kind of flesh out a vision and come to a mutual understanding on what we're even doing. But there is a vision. There is, I do have something relatively well-defined in mind. It's just that it's sort of implicit in a lot of different things, and we need to make those explicit. And I need to turn them from subjective experiences into intersubjective alignments and agreements and actions. So why don't we kick off just saying hi. Jeremy, you are going by the name of Sybil Killian today. Oops.
Yeah, that was someone else's. I have to log into another Zoom account for a client, and it keeps logging me in as that. But yeah.
How's it going?
Good. I guess we're doing like a little round.
Just a quick check-in.
Yeah.
Introductions. I think you may know everybody here, but for the sake of anybody who may be seeing this later.
Cool. Yeah, I think I've met John Kellden online through Facebook at some point in one of those random threads. But yeah, hi. My name's Jeremy. I've been Marco's colleague, co-conspirator for the past, just coming up on a year now, when we were just gestating these initial ideas, and doing the editorial work on MetaSci, and just really excited to have more people on board. And in terms of check-in, doing well, because later today we're going to have a MetaSci meeting as well, sort of an extension. If anybody wants to stick around for that, that would be cool too. I know Michael Garfield has submitted something, and Richard Murray, so you're here too. So yeah, cool.
All right. Well, how about Richard, since you were here last time as well?
My name is Richard Murray. I'm kind of new to the MetaSci community, and it's great being here. And I've been reading a bunch of really interesting stuff at MetaSci, and also learning about the larger community, the infinite conversations and things like that. So I'm looking forward to just kind of learning more about different systems here and how everything works together. And good to be here.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
How about John?
Yeah, I'm John Kellden, running the conversation community, 3,400 members. I read lots of great stuff from Jeremy, from Mark, or from Richard. And I think there's some interesting synergies. I mean, there's lots of resonances in between. And growing the community is kind of close to my heart, right? Kind of what I want to figure out more. And I have to also apologize because I have been strapped for time last week, so I haven't really given the Infinite Conversations that made us high any justice recently. But I fairly good reader, so I hope I will catch up soon.
Thank you. Hey, Michael. Garfield, are you there?
Yeah, hey, what's up?
So how are you doing? And just introduce yourself for folks that might see this later.
Yeah, I am doing all right. I hope you don't mind me just being a fly on the wall mostly today. But I'm definitely always curious to keep nuzzled up on all of the flawed visionary ventures. And this looks like a good one. So I'm just hanging out. Thank you for the invite, Marco. I'm hanging out to just get a sense for what it is that this thing is and what, if anything, I may be able to contribute to it.
Cool. Yeah, I want to say too that this is the second meeting specifically about co-op, and I've been calling it a co-op development meeting. But and I haven't really made we haven't sent an email to our whole list or anything like that. So I've just invited a few people, like folks that have submitted work to metapsychosis or folks who I've been in touch with otherwise. But the idea is that it's an open kind of space, and whoever wants to come in, even just to be a fly on the wall and see what it's about, is totally welcome to. And it ultimately needs to, I think, transform into more of a kind of action-oriented type of meeting. And, I think that these will evolve over time. But at this point, it's like informational, it's information gathering, it's perspective gathering, people gathering. And like I said earlier, for me, it's an opportunity to kind of lay out the ideas and begin to kind of distill what is going to be our actual, really core and coherent message that we put out when we launched this. So that said, I'd like to just wrap for a couple of minutes, and I'll see where it goes. I'm gonna keep my eye on the clock and try not to go long. I'd like to keep the meeting as a whole pretty tight because we have another meeting coming up later specifically for metapsychosis editorial discussion. And we'll need to have like lunch and stuff before then. But I began last week talking about my felt need for doing these projects, which I thought might resonate with others' needs. And a quick summary of that is I basically said I'm a writer and an artist, and I want to write and make art. And I'm finding it hard to do that in the context of our existing economic and social and media and cultural structures. And I think that we could do better if we organize ourselves to create a sustaining structure for each of us as writers, artists, conversationalists, soul workers. I mean, there's a sort of diffuse group of people I think I have in mind that would be interested in this project, if we have a common structure to support all of our efforts. And I've been contemplating what that looks like for quite a while. And around 3 years ago, I got this vision. This circumstances of which I'll share at another time, but I got this vision that I called a theory of everybody. Or that called itself, to me, a theory of everybody. That was the phrase that whispered in my ear. And of course, it's a play on a theory of everything. But it has, for me, a totally different flavor and resonance. And part of what that is I think, an ethical orientation. There's I think, an ethical and a poetic and a spiritual vision that is implied in that idea. And so I have a hard time talking about it in terms that are too practical, that are too logistical. because I want it to have, and I think it needs to have, a certain amount of just suggestive power. And what that ultimately will manifest as, I think, will unfold over time. But the basic kind of practical idea of a theory of everybody is that it would be a platform. And so what is a platform? I thought a platform is something on which other things can happen. So right now we have a journal, Metapsychosis, and that could be its own thing. For all intents and purposes, it is just its own thing right now. But it could also be part of it could exist on a platform that sustains other things which interact with it in various ways. So people can kind of go back and forth and fulfill different needs or express different aspects of their work in those other areas. So this platform, a theory of everybody, has these core projects on it at this time, and more kind of in mind and more possible. But the core projects are what we've been pulling together over the last year, working with Jeremy and a few other co-conspirators. The other elements of the platform are the conversations side of it, and that is both a discussion forum at infiniteconversations.com as well as a podcast network. Ultimately, right now it's just one show, and at infiniteconversations.fm, and the journal, which is about literature and art and thought, and we call it a journal of consciousness, culture, and planetary thought. So I see it as a place for like experimental, really like, I hate to use a cliche word, but cutting edge thinking. That's not even a good way of really, I think, thinking about it. But there's a certain quality, I think, that we're looking for in that space, which is more experimental and playful and depth oriented. And an artistic, aesthetic, not just theory, not just literature either. It's an interesting, I think, convergence of intelligences that we're playing with. And then we also started out with a book club, and we read The Dispossessed, we read The Ever-Present Origin, we read The Saddlebag, we read Geek Love. I talked about this a bit last time. But we're folding that in now to a sort of underground, location within the metapsychosis sphere, and that's a start. And I see that there are certain kind of synergistic functions that those play. I think the conversation is really, really important. I think that just putting stuff out and letting it go at that is not really enough. And what we put out needs to have a kind of feedback loop where we're really engaging with readers and engaging with the wider community that's going to take ideas and go in different directions with them. So I think the conversations is important. I think the reading is important. The actual study and the actual engagement with the literary intelligence is important, and it's, to me, an antidote to the what Carmen Leilani calls the infinite scroll. It's just kind of this, whatever platform we're on, we just scroll through basically incoherent content. And then, of course, a lot of the content's interesting and a lot of it is relevant and important, but the experience of it is incoherent. And so then, the other aspects of the platform start to bleed into the cooperative idea. And those have to do with the economic support and with the organizational structure. And I don't want to kind of go into those quite yet, but just to name them, they're what I've been calling the gift economy, the co-op marketplace, and then the co-op itself. Because to do all this work, to put the journal together and the book club and the conversations and to kind of put this out takes a lot of work. So we need to be able to form an organization that can sustain us financially, can pay a staff salary. And I think we need to use that to create the platform that can sustain others who want to plug into it. So that would be other writers, artists, and people who are not necessarily going to work on it full time, but who find in it a support for their own projects and a community that resonates with what they do, that responds intelligently and meaningfully to what they do, and who basically lets us amplify each other. So when I started from the place of my needs and what I felt I needed, I came really quickly to the idea that I would not be able to get what I needed as a writer without other people being able to get what they need. And so going from this kind of place of not having a real coherent community or real coherent, structures to do the level of work that I want to do, I came to the idea that we need to cooperate on making that happen. And so that brings us to this, to what the real vision is. Like what is going to be valuable to people? What's going to be attractive to people, such that we can draw enough of a critical mass of talent, of resources, of financial support, and basically, a community that wants to be a part of it at whatever level, really, really intimately or more casually, but wants to be a part of it, wants to see it exist. And for me, like as I was thinking about this leading up to the meeting now, it came to one angle into it, I would say, is that it has something to do with coherence. It has something to do with bringing more coherence into our creative and social lives. And, I wrote this piece about Facebook, and I think the reason that Facebook bugs me so much is because it feels so incoherent. It feels so, just dissipative of my energies. And I feel that there's so much more that we could do if we were actually sustained. And if we could build a more coherent community. But as we know, community is very, very hard. And, I can't, speaking for myself, the attempts I've seen to bring together a kind of a community of people around, big vision, big ideas, and this sort of idealistic, world transforming type of impulses, it's very difficult, and it tends to get colonized by kind of the patterns of the context that we are coming out of. And so that could be, if it's a private company, it could be the hierarchy of the company and the fact that it's owned by one particular group or one particular person, and their agenda is not synced up with the agenda of everybody else. Or if it's something like a social network like Facebook, it's that everybody is on there for free, and they're not really, they're doing an incredible amount of creative and intellectual labor and giving it into the platform, but the actual economic structure of it is such that they don't reap the benefits of that. And in fact, the argument could be made that they're being used and exploited to enrich a very small group of people. So that's how we come to this idea of some community structure, some community center that can enact a different kind of structure, enact a different set of values. And that's the cooperative idea, which I'm understanding in this context, in terms of creative democracy, this idea of creative democracy. And I talked a little bit about last time as well. It comes from John Dewey, but I really mean it. What would it mean to create a small society? Essentially, that's what this would be, which practices what we could call creative democracy. What would be the value proposition of that to people? What about that type of vision, and what about what we might offer within that sphere? Could actually have some legs, can actually exist in the world and sustain and become something that through which we can do things, through which we can not only publish the journal, not only host conversations and publish podcasts and so forth, but do events publish books, reach out, to other, to people in other parts of the world where that may not have, access to the conversations or the ability to do the work that we're starting to be able to do. That's the vision I want to put forth, and I have various ideas on how we can organize it, but those are a schematic at this point, and they will need to be filled in through a series of additional conversations. But once we have enough of a structure in mind, and once it's explicit enough, once we can see what it looks like and really determine what is where each of us individually can play a role, then I think we can launch it out and invite a larger population to be a part of it, and then we'll see what happens. It's an experiment, but it's an experiment that I'm taking very, very seriously because in over a decade since the last such experiment I was involved in, I've seen that there's, I think, a real need for it. And particularly around the network of people that I know and the sort of distributed network of the people that, all of you, I really see that there's just so much talent and there's so much brilliance that doesn't seem to be organizing into something that could be, that could actually, sustain a better form of life. And I don't know how else to put it than that. I think that's probably not very elegant, but I just see a lot of wasted potential, and I would like to kind of draw that in and do something more with it. So with that, I'd like to open it up and let you guys respond, and clarify. Let's clarify what's unclear. If you have ideas that or correspond or complement or challenge or question, I'm very open to hearing those as well. And let's just take 15 minutes or so and do that, and then move on to some kind of closing round.
I just made copious notes. I'm not sure if should I. Just say a couple of things. I really like the whole vibe, the whole sort of direction of it. I met with some people recently who have sort of found rediscovered both the value of and also the importance of aesthetic as sort of a guiding principle. So I'm right in the middle of sort of reorganizing my mind around that, because for me that's kind of I'm Swedish, kind of fairly utilitarian, as Swedes mostly are, right? I see a need and I do stuff and it fills the need and I'm done, mostly, right? The aesthetic is kind of opening up a whole new dimension to play with. So the aesthetic can actually be, let's see if I can sort of connect the dots here. So the task can then be kind of all about decision quality, so that everyone is on board and everyone is sort of aligned and values and so on. So, but that can also actually sort of be an aesthetic in its own right and help make good on the continuous envisioning, if this sort of grows and morphs into whatever it is we want it to morph into, right, and what the shape it takes. So that's kind of basically for me tasks. Story is anchoring down, anchoring up. This is kind of my own way of sort of trying to sort lots of information at the same time, right? That whole thing. And anchoring down is practice, and anchoring up is narrative. The big narrative here is kind of, let's for God's sake do something that is at least slightly better than Facebook. Is kind of one simple way to sort of frame the narrative platform. And the review part, that's story. Review part is then we'll have to make the necessary and sufficient mistakes to learn from. And that will inform how we frame and reframe the things I really love the biological metaphors. Those zygote fetuses birth, the kind of growing legs, whatever kind of organic. Those are things I've used myself under the hood in the conversation community. And they work. It informs my way of writing it and presenting stuff, right? It's kind of, it's there under the hood, so to speak. Because it creeps in, right? Under the hood is kind of not an organic matter. That's kind of actually an automobile or a machine, right? So kind of, it's very important with that sort of keep to some kind of aesthetic that it actually makes sense. The whole sense impression of the thing, right? I mean, that was kind of just me blitzing through my notes.
Just a quick response to that, John. The word coherence, to me, it functions a little bit more organically than like a word such as like integration, for example. This is just a note from my thinking earlier today. When we pay attention to the words we use, like you noted that you use the word under the hood, and that may be casual, and you all get exactly what you're saying. But it's interesting how the ways that we even just talk about it tend to reinforce certain structures of mind, that may be more mechanistic versus more organic, or more rigid or closed versus more open and, processional or processual. So that is just a
yeah. I mean, it is important. I mean, I took great care in almost never ever using the word want, because that's such a powerful word and it's rooted in scarcity. So whenever you use that in a sentence, it sort of triggers scarcity mindset and everyone else who reads the stuff you put out. So it kind of, I mean, I'm Swedish, right? And I mean, I have sort of a love-hate relationship to the English language because it's full of empire. It's kind of, it's a minefield, whole English language, but it's what we've got, right? It's the web pigeon. So let's make good use of it. So I'm not completely against using English, so it kind of, but it's used with care. And I mean, the obvious things is worth mentioning as well, right? Infinite conversations, love that frame. Eventually, platform and projects probably need to co-evolve, but we might not be fully there yet. I mean, and also one of those obvious things in terms of the brand, if that's word is allowed. My having done a couple of years of sort of branding exercises is basically very simple. It's metaphor and metonymy, and you have really done an excellent job of that, both in the explicit and also in the inactive embodied sense in the platform as it is already. Sense impressions is the tricky part. How do people experience being on the platform? Do they feel sort of at home? Can they inhabit it? Right, that's very tricky. And then the fourth leg of that particular branding elephant is the proposition framework that then underpins and supports the value proposition. What floor, what safe ground? I mean, values, right? And upon which the rest is resting, right? That's pretty much it, right? Those metaphor, metonymy, sense impressions, and proposition framework. If those gel, and I mean, we can actually allow us to go, because Facebook is a brand, right? And it's a shallow brand. They really don't care one flying fig about us because we're eyeballs, right? So we can do brand and inhabit it with a sort of live, thriving story, which is us, which is the community underneath. We win. I mean, sorry for using the win thing, but significantly better. So we begin to draw people because they sense that this is so much better, so why not join, right? Instead of us doing classical marketing, which is kind of iffy. And, well, Facebook's 1 billion people, so we go against them in terms of marketing warfare. Well, 1 billion people, right? But if we are good and play to our strengths, the story, then, I mean, the whole attractor, right? The whole attractiveness. Yeah, sorry for kind of rambling on, but it's try to cram most of my thoughts in there.
So this, go ahead, Richard.
Oh no, if you want to make a response to that, please.
Well, no, I think it's okay. I mean, the only thing about the story piece is, like, where it's interesting is that, we have to be careful with the story, because the more rigid the story becomes, the less aesthetic it is. the more it becomes a brand, the less it's a real transcendence of the whole consumer paradigm. And of course, on one level, or seen through that lens, we could talk about it as a brand, and we could talk about it, through the particular, using the proper business and marketing terminology. And I think I don't have a problem with us doing that and with it working that way. However, I think what the thing really is what then becomes important, because whatever it really is, not just what we say about it, is going to exude out. I mean, what we say, the story we tell, needs to come from who we are. And so, although it's important to do the marketing exercise of figuring out, what your value proposition is and so forth, and who your, target audience and is, and that will be useful. I think that, where that really should come from, if it's not gonna corrupt, the soul of this, is it has to come from who we actually are, from how we actually are organized, how we actually interact with each other, and what kind of work we do, that what we put out. That I think is really the core of it. So just some reflections. Richard, do you want to?
Just a note about community. It's interesting. Both community and democracy are very difficult things to found, and it requires a lot of startup impetus and momentum, as well as constant guidance. Just looking at the democracy here in the States, an almost idyllic situation for the founding of a democracy here. And look at how hard it was. We had the first decades of the democracy were a lot of chaos, and some people would say our democracy has never been unchaotic and not riddled with problems. And I think that, then going back to community, as far as like a more spiritual community goes, one time talking with one of the monks down in Big Sur at the Camaldolese Hermitage there, I was a member there for about 6 years, and one of the fellows who was the prior, the leader of the community, Bruno Barnhart, one time said that founding a community, a group of beings who stick together, gets the most fighting against you. That to found a community is a lot of work and a lot of difficulty. Now, that is a specific religion, a Catholic monastery hermitage, but just the notion of founding a community in the world is a brave, bold idea that requires a lot of work and a lot of dedication, a lot of stick-to-itiveness. Is that it's require everyone to be connected in a particular way. It's a very free community, loose community. People can come and go. Many different people are writers and readers and likers of metapsychosis and infinite conversations. I think that's brilliant. That's a good way for modern community to be there. How do we, what question, I think you're asking the right questions. How do we continue that? And what, I guess I'm kind of thinking out loud here too, if it's not a community of a particular faith or outlook or philosophy, what kind of community is it? It seems to be a very inviting community, open community. Like you said, art, literature, spirituality, new ideas. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud, like you are, about what is the community, how is it planted in the ground, and where does it go from there? Sorry, though that was kind of just a ramble of thought, but like you said, it's good to get these things out there just to start thinking about it and such.
Mm-hmm.
And just the fact that even without solid answers, or in the next week, just the fact that we're talking about it is getting the ball rolling, and getting some momentum going, which can then be directed in good directions.
Yeah, I would try that. Let me unmute you. I think I'm echoing. Hold on one sec. Okay, is that better? Yes. I just want to tie that to something Jan said earlier, which is the idea of leading with the aesthetic. I think that's actually really important in this context because, like you're saying, the open part of it is that there isn't a single dominant philosophy or theoretical framework or religious framework for that matter. There's the broad idea of writing art. I think there's an intersection between people that on the one hand are interested in art and aesthetics or writing, on the other hand are interested in spirituality or consciousness or awakening, and I think on the other hand have some social I don't know what to call it, social desire, social drive, to this world transforming kind of like we can see something better. We want to be part of a transformative movement. So that there's that convergence point. But what I have seen, partly through my other engagements and just through the through the landscape, the cultural landscape, is that's really where it's tricky, because if it's a brand, like if it's a company, then it's always going to be about the success of that company, and creating some mystique around it, and like getting those eyeballs, like getting your share of the market to be successful within the existing paradigm, within the existing framework that we're living in. If on the other hand, it's more of a social enterprise or more of a nonprofit or that kind of a thing, but it has a very specific type of set of ideas that it's working with, then that can work as well. I mean, that certainly does work. But that's not what I'm interested in. I mean, I'm not drawn to a particular set of ideas or framework, and so that's just a founding fact, of this particular effort. On the other hand, I think that if it's a dance between this openness and this specificity, because in a certain way you could say that, I mean, almost anything we put out is what this is. It's not subsumed. For example, Brian George's work, which I've been really getting into lately, I couldn't subsume that within any particular school or ideology or religious framework or intellectual framework. I just couldn't subsume it under that. I think that it actively resists that. I mean, it is something unto itself. At the same time, I feel like it has a really nice home, like on this platform. I mean, I feel like there's a spaciousness enough here. There's spaciousness enough here for that kind of work, and for that work to exist alongside, say, the kinds of conversations that Jan has been cultivating. Like I don't see them as incompatible. I see them as part of an ecosystem where maybe here there's a little more sun and shade, and here we apply some different nutrients into the soil, but they could coexist, and I would want them to, because I myself enjoy them both in different ways, and so that is a challenge, though, because it doesn't let us really kind of say, this is the idea. If you believe in this, or if you subscribe to this, to these tenets or whatever, then that's what it is. And it's easy to make easy to relate yourself to it in that way. But that's the challenge of any work of art. I mean, part of what, one of the books that kicked this whole thing off was David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. It's hard to describe that book. I mean, yeah, it's a book about drug addicts. It's a book about tennis prodigies. It's a book about terrorists. It's funny. It's tragic. I mean, it's very hard to summarize it, and yet it's a profound work of art. And over the years, as people have entered into it and actually done the work to read the thing, they've discovered how just explosive and how brilliant that artistic vision that Wallace put into that book was. And in this case, we're kind of making, the way I see it is, we're making a work of art, but it's not just coming out of one person's brain. It's bringing together, the work is at the meta level. It's sort of a meta novel that has enough room for for other expressions, and for expressions that we don't even know are out there yet. Oh, sorry. Let me unmute you.
Okay. And what Jan was saying earlier, like in a sense, just the way metapsychosis is now is awesome. It's an open platform, lots of good different ideas and writing and artwork there. It's wonderful. And yet at the same time, it seems like we're trying to make it more, how do you say it, more of a communal reality, more of an entity that can stand on its own 2 feet, so to speak. And I see Jan as providing some ideas about, all right, how do we bring it from this open platform that's there, that's simply good as an open platform in a lot of ways, and how do we start to tether that to the earth and tether that within certain modes of communal being, if I'm reading Jan right, in what Jan said. And then so that does require some principles, some organization, more so than simply the metapsychosis journal as it is now. So I guess some of the questions are, what do we need to do to sort of tether those ideas to as you said, a platform, to have it free and open, yet at the same time connected in more ways to a platform, to the ground. Mm-hmm. And so, to sort of bring in the communal aspects and the operational aspects of things. And just an idea.
Mm-hmm.
No, those are great. I mean, I can give you kind of a little bit of backstory conversation community. It started Google Plus. It started from 0. I mean, and then quickly grew into 150 people. Then I had kind of one of my few brilliant ideas. So I sent a private letter to every single one of the 150 first members and threatened to throw them out, every last single one of them, if they didn't contribute, because it was a conversation community already from the start. So it was kind of pointless if they were in a conversation community, kind of process-centric, and they didn't converse. That's ridiculous, right? And in a topic-based community, it is okay if you don't, because it's just a topic, right? You chime in or not. And everyone responded, no, please don't throw me out. I love it here. And it sort of took off from there. And then I learned gradually that I basically couldn't, I could sort of more or less manage it up to 300-400 people. And now it's 1,500 people there, 3,400 in Facebook. It has to be self-organizing. I mean, I could go on at length, kind of there's different layers of self-organizing, but to sum up, one of my guiding principles has sort of stuck throughout, that has sort of served me well. That's the David White thing, the poet, right, who says kind of the conversation is the work. So I try to do 80 or 90%, depending on if I'm having a good day or not, to sort all the stuff that needs to be sorted in the actual comment threads, which leaves me with sort of less stuff to do underneath, sort of in private Facebook chat messages. Right? There's, out of 3,400, there's been 35 people who have been thrown out. thankfully 30 of us just sort of plain vanilla spammers and good riddance, right? You always have those. So there's just 5 of the 3,400 who has been removed out of sort of irreconcilable differences. Basically, when I say, actually, you need to sort of make good on add considered comments on other people's posts, and they will eventually, no, I won't do that. Right? Invariably men, and they then come up eventually when I squeeze their arm a bit, say, but my content is better. That doesn't fly with me being a Swede, right? So I'm kind of a Democrat and egalitarian through and through. So if someone tries to pull that, I just stop listening, right? I mean, that really doesn't work. So the co-op is sort of, me and a couple of friends here in Norrköping, in Sweden, we actually founded a co-op daycare center. That was way back when our kids were small. So we did all that. So I kind of expect, so if this is a good idea, there will be kerfuffles, there will be contingencies, there will be things that need to be sorted. Otherwise, this isn't really a good thing, because it sort of evoke deeper layers in us. That is okay, because out of that will grow sort of a healthy little creature called whatever it's going to be called, right? And I mean, this platform. The story, I don't see any problems with that either, because if we are more or less agreed on the aesthetic as a guiding principle, I mean, shorthand, we will not do something that is sort of ugly in whatever kind of way we can conceive of that, right? And that sort of goes with anything from spirituality to practical matters, right? I mean, I'm not worried because the platform is really nice looking as it is. So that takes care of the practical side. Spirituality is, well, just judging by me, grew up in a lukewarm, agnostic Lutheran family, as everyone else did in Sweden. So I was sort of an atheist when I was young, and then I had sort of a weird, mystical Christ experience when I was considerably older. So I had a kind of the weirdest possible path throughout the spiritual realm. So, but spirit is almost never the problem. Usually the problem is if there's an implicit agenda framework that is sort of there and you can't talk about it. So if we can't talk about it, it's kind of, again, David White, right? The conversations work. If there's someone who is possibly weirder than me, I have found very few people who are weirder than me. But anyway, that might exist those, right? And if we can talk about that sort of and join in fellow weirdness, then it's fine. Creative democracy is, I see as a possible pull to sort of get some kind of momentum, some kind of movement. Right? It's new enough to sort of have some novelty value, and it's sort of obviously a good enough value for everyone to. I probably have to read up on David Foster Wallace, but I more or less agree from what I remember that if we are aligned enough, so we're at least able to respond well enough to those who then come to us and want to join, because they will see us as misrepresenting us, even like a brand or a company, or what's with these guys? Who do you think you are? Sort of, if a Swede tells to a fellow Swede, who do you think you are? That's kind of a mortal insult and meant to quash you, right? So if you don't take it as that, instead of just responding kind, you can actually make friends with people, even if they sort of ask a very sort of abrasive first question. I wrote down the aesthetic ones, the guiding principles to anchor well enough in the community, it becomes a continuous reenaction of us as the living story. I'm not sure if that makes any sense whatsoever, but it's kind of what I just did some process writing. So I just wrote down the first thing that came into my mind. Right? The enaction and reenaction of the spaciousness is I see as important. If we want to grow, right? If there's room for more than us, right? Yeah.
Well, let me ask a question then and put it out. Actually, before I do, Jeremy or Michael, if you guys want to, you can chime in, or I can go into a question.
No, go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I mean, to get practical, to tie the platform down, like you're suggesting, Richard, and to begin inviting people in, as you're pointing to, Jan. I think we need some clear, succinct presentation of what we're doing, what the vision is, of what the needs are that we're proposing to address, and then how to get involved. Like what are the steps 1, 2, and 3? And like I said, I have a basic schema in mind of how that could look, but it's going to need to be filled out by actual content, actual design, actual structures. And so I guess the question I would have is, like, how clear is that? You know, I talked a little bit today, I talked a little bit last week. There's material scattered amongst various websites. How clear is it what we're even offering? If you were wanting to participate in this, become a member of the co-op, and what would you expect that you'd be getting out of that? And what would you expect that would be expected of you for that participation? Like, where are the real holes there that we need clarity? What are we not talking about that we need to have a conversation about? If not this time, then perhaps next time, or asynchronously in the forum, in our conversation space.
There's many different ways you could do that. I mean, there's some kind of onboarding stuff. There's a mentoring approach you can choose. I went with just making lots of mistakes, and it sort of just grew because I wanted to figure out self-organizing, but that's just me. In Brainstorms, which I've been a member of since 2001, there was lots and lots of talking combined with an initial couple of months of sort of mentoring. So when I joined 2001, I got assigned an old stogie that sort of led me through sort of hand-holding, right? So eventually I sort of felt included. And so that creates kind of a quite strong bond. You know that you're a newbie, you're going to sort of look and be and act a bit stupid at first, because you're a newbie, you don't know your ways around, and the others are talking strange shorthand stuff that you don't really know if you can dare chime in or not, and so on, right? So that having a sort of a mentor is a great thing. I mean, also, possibly, but this is me thinking on my feet, right? A co-mentoring approach that sort of gets woven into the actual sort of design could work really well. So then it's kind of on which is aligned with the sort of the whole creative democracy thing. Kind of, you've been there 15 minutes, so go join the co-mentoring thing and become an old stogie the next day already. Right? It's kind of not that the old stogie is kind of the perfect word for it, but that's what we call it in Brainstorms. I have sort of tons of other ideas, but usually something that helps everyone who joins feel somehow included, and almost directly from there can sort of sink their teeth in any which kind of project, or can I do something with podcasts, or can I do this, or can I, well, something, right? Anything really. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was happy as a child in 2001 when I discovered that I could actually start a new topic in the conversation community. In the Brainstorms, and actually people sort of started having conversation with complete strangers, right? I mean, I was a Swede and they were all Americans, and they were wickedly smart, and suddenly I was talking with them. And I mean, I stayed since, right? So that was created a very strong attraction. So the conversations can act as both sort of onboarding, as building coherence. I mean, peer-driven, right? I mean, if we sort of direct or demand or coerce coherence, that's just kind of crappy, right? So it's much better to have it sort of grow organically. So possibly not completely self-organized, because we want to make sure that there's a good enough initial alignment, right? So it's if someone puts in ads from eBay, it's kind of when we know that we got too divergent, right? I mean, it's kind of, we don't want that, right? But people are fairly good at picking up cues. As I said, there's 5 people, because I sort of directed with sort of lots of things, right? So 5 people out of 3,400. People are essentially good. I'm not sure if that is your experience, but that is kind of mine over the years. It's kind of, given half a chance, they will do something, and you can find a spot for them to, and particularly in this case, I think, if this is budding writers, budding artists, budding alternative creative people, right? They lack some kind of support structure. So keep telling them that this is growing into support structure. So your feedback will actually be essential. That's also one of those really, really strong things that builds trust and coherence, right? You'll have to tell me if I'm using either cohesion or coherence. I sometimes mix them up. In Swedish, that is basically the same word. So it's kind of, I know that that's not the same thing in English, but I mean, it's community is a very particular thing in Sweden, right? It's kind of, it's almost tribal in Sweden, community, right? You know your communities and you stay within them, basically, in Sweden, right? Not sure how it is in America if you do a community like that.
I think those 2 words are a bit different. Cohesion to me suggests something sticking together, whereas coherence suggests something resonating together. So to me, coherence is a little bit more spacious. That might just be semantic.
Yeah.
We are at the top of the hour, so I don't want to go too much longer. I really appreciated those reflections, and I think that idea in particular of a kind of mentorship or onboarding kind of process where somebody who's interested, who wants to become a member as a creative contributor or as a conversation member, that we have some process in place really for them to, an application process probably, and that may be different on different levels. I mean, if somebody who's coming in wants to be a resident artist or writer, we're going to look at aesthetic criteria, right? We want people that are doing their work. Or if somebody just wants to be part of conversations and participate in these online events, maybe attend other events that we might do in person, that kind of a thing, then the bar is a lot lower. And basically, if they're on a psychopath and they generally are into what we're into, then I think they'd be completely welcome here. But for that, because we are all weird, and because we are all like trafficking in these like meta languages and these kind of esoteric fictions, I think that it will be especially important to just to help people feel like they know their way around, like they feel comfortable, even with the basic functions of replying to a post or logging on to a conference, knowing what's even available, because ideally we'll have actual things available that people can participate in, that makes it worth their membership. So just to give one idea, one thing I have in mind is that there would be a dedicated forum and some dedicated structure with regular meetings and space specifically for collaboration. I call it the Creative Studio. And the idea is that when I was in college, the painters, had this big room where they each had a space for themselves, and they were working on their paintings or on their sculptures or whatever it is. And you could wander into that room and see what other people are working on and talk to people. And, their tools were all over the place. They had a common sink. They had some common resources, but it was a place where you could do your work, but you were doing it in a communal type of environment. And what I would see is that people that are working on a creative project or a writing project could bring their work into this peer-to-peer type of studio and actually get useful feedback about it, actually get engagement, with something that they're passionate about, and have that engagement be meaningful, like have it be at the same level or quality that you would get at an MFA program, for example, that you would pay tens of thousands of dollars for, but instead you're paying $10 or $25 a month, and you have access to a community that is, awake and, interesting, and it wants to support you, and wants to see what you can do, wants to see what you can contribute. That to me is a huge, huge value proposition. And then if you produce something that really is worth sharing with a wider audience, then we have these publications where we can, actually present your work. So that, like the podcast network or the journal, or books that we might do, or films that we might be able to finance, and that kind of a thing. I mean, I'm thinking out beyond. I think we need to have a sense of allowing people to grow as well, to come from being maybe in a place where they don't even necessarily know what they're doing, but they're attracted, where they can get some support to find their voice or to clarify their ideas, and where whatever they produce, there's a place for it. Maybe it's just a community space where they can share it with others, but then there's also a curatorial dimension where really the best of the best that comes out of it, we really promote. And we use that to grow the audience for everybody. So anyway, I could go on ideas like that, but the point is that what I ultimately envision is that we have concrete sort of benefits, like that creative studio space, the peer-to-peer kind of MFA. It's also yeah. I mean, I don't want to go on too long. As for next steps, I'm going to do another meeting next week. I think that what would be useful is for us to follow up on the forum on some specific next steps that anybody that if you want to take, you can take. I don't have, this is a collaborative space. I have a certain vision that I'm putting forth, but I really want people to do what they feel like their gift really could be. And perhaps we could start exploring like what, in Jeremy's case, we already know this. But Richard, Jan, Michael, we're going to be, speaking a bit more too. Let's. I would invite you to follow up on the forum with ideas and just start there. And then, next week we can take it a step further and begin to maybe put some more, concrete deliverables in place in terms of what we want to do toward a launch of this in a couple of months.
Is that the time frame? So in a couple of months, it's kind of we aim for some launch.
Well, I don't know. Everything seems to take twice as long as I originally think it will. I think that as I have a certain sense of urgency around it because I don't have an economic base right now. I have a few clients. I have kind of scattered work, and I've been putting in a lot of time into this now for 3 years really, and 1 year at a even higher level. So it would be good to have something in place where we could begin raising money, where we could reach out to a couple of investors and or benefactors, and where we could we can gauge whether or not it would be appropriate to do something like a crowdfunding or some called it a crowd owning campaign. I don't know if we're going to be there yet. I think timing is really everything with those kinds of things. So I don't want to push it. On the other hand, I can't afford to be too lackadaisical about it either.
Oh, good points. I mean, the short answer to all of those is to get a sufficient alignment around the cooperative. So everyone begins to sort of, that's how we did it in Sweden, right? Suddenly everyone understood that things needs to be done by me, by when, and we did, right? And that's a very Swedish way. We talked ourselves to death for a couple of weeks, and then everyone just started doing stuff, and it worked. That's a very Swedish way of doing it. So I'm not sure, but that's going to be perfectly replicated. But as soon as there is a understanding of the necessity of having the organizing structure, if you call it that, right? The cooperative as in itself. But that also is, you said something that I think is really, really important. So some kind of initial economy of sorts, kind of a couple of artworks, a couple of books, a couple of events, something. So I mean, to break that sort of nothing is really going on, and now there is, right? It doesn't have to be much money, just that there's something. So then suddenly there's an economy. Now suddenly this little baby has got grown legs, right? And then the cooperative itself supports that, and then the cooperative marketplace, because that will draw people, because now they know that, hey, stuff is happening, right? And so those, I mean, I drew a triple Venn diagram, kind of the gift economy as a circle, and the coop itself, the kind of the organization structure, and the marketplace. And then there's some really interesting overlap, right? Which, Marco, you did a brilliant job of actually outlining some of those kind of things that need to be navigated in terms of actually getting them to align, those three, right? But the thing that usually takes most work is sort of getting the economy in place. Even for us, when we did the cooperative, it took 3 times as long as we planned to actually get the money from the Norrköping municipality, which was sort of sponsoring our cooperative, right? But once we got them finally to sort of help us get going, then the rest just fell into place. Not that it's a perfect match. I mean, it's not a perfect analogy between a daycare center and a kind of an artist's community, but I mean, it's all the other stuff is pretty much the same. I mean, the cooperative is going to be pretty much the same legal and organizing structure. If we can survive things actually taking longer than we would have, that's also a good thing, right? It means that we actually give a damn about whether this works or not. Right? Mm. So is it not saying that we should always go frustrated through life, but I mean, it's if we would just sort of be complacent about it, it's absolutely not going to work. So yeah, symbolic things, right? Social objects, not sure what you call them. Kind of that first thing that's, you're doing stuff. And then others will tell that there's something happening, right? Mm-hmm. That's sort of the magic I see. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so next time you're asking for ideas, right?
Well, that might be too vague. I would that might be too vague. I mean, I think I know that I have I don't have a good sense of how clear this whole scheme is. I think that you reflecting back on the gift economy and the marketplace piece of it is important, because I have a bunch of thinking about that, and I think we could begin to create our own economy pretty much immediately, even without money. All we have to do is begin to pretend that we have money, if that makes sense. And then when we do have money, turn that money into real, currency that we could use. So I'm being cryptic. What I mean by that is that what I have in mind with the gift economy and with the marketplace is that we do develop a currency amongst ourselves within the cooperative, and that we use that currency to begin to kind of engage a sense that we're creating value, and to begin to get a sense that the work that we're putting into it has a representation, is recognized. So all the work I've put in, all the work Jeremy has put in, the writers who've contributed work to us, that we didn't compensate them for, can we begin to recognize that value amongst ourselves, even if we don't have the money to actually pay them? But with the sort of promise that if we invest in this, if we invest our time, energy, attention, love, care, intelligence, creativity, and so forth into building something that ultimately does have an economic engine, that recognition could lead to essentially wealth. It could lead to salary, or it could lead to support for a project that you might be working on, or some compensation for your time, something that enables you really to do this work. So again, I think we should wrap it up because we do have a couple of other meetings coming on. But that's sort of the idea of the Litcoin. I mean, part of what I'm thinking would make this real, paradoxically, would make it real is if we started, paying ourselves, started exchanging, and then we'd have Litcoin, and even if it's just in a spreadsheet, even if it's just some way of tracking, like, okay, who's doing what, and this is what this is what the exchange is, and then when we bring in the legal aspect of stocks and shares, and that'll translate. So we'll write it into our bylaws that the value of a Litcoin is equal to some proportion of the total value that or surplus in the entity. I don't know if that's going to be the greatest straw for everybody, but for somebody that's participating and actually working on this, it's sort of like owning stock in a company before it becomes valuable. I mean, that's basically what it would be, and it would be some preferred stock. So it would have, it's not speculative, and we're not going to become millionaires, I don't think, through this. That's not the motivation. But it's some way of recognizing that, we actually have skin in the game, and that, we actually are, even though it's starting in the imagination, that there is the intention to bring this, to the ground and to make this into an actually sustainable venture.
No, I mean, it's good. No, it's good. It's good. A good idea. Yeah.
So that may be one concrete way we could begin following up. And in addition to other ideas around mentorship and conversation and the kind of, I think what you brought in, Richard, as well. I mean, you're sort of talking about the ethos, or really the communal being together. There's something there that, that needs to be unpacked. And that's, how we speak with each other, how we work together, what kind of accountability we even have. Like, I think the ethical dimension of it is very important. And I think that, I want to have a very strong ethical orientation, and communicate that so that it's just understood that, this is not a place you're going to get, abused by each other or by a spiritual teacher or what have you. I mean,
or also that it's not merely a profit-making thing. And I also like the idea we mentioned last time that, several people were very dissatisfied with the way capitalism has been working and such, and what it's done to our planet. And so this is also a real model, an experiment, and a foray into doing things under a new system, a new way, a more community-based way, not a corporation. Obviously, in itself, is not a democracy, which is one of the problems with corporations, except in rare circumstances. And so, but doing this in a new way could be an exciting new development as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And the profit aspect is really interesting. It's important because what we're doing is not nonprofit, but it's not for profit either.
Right.
And that's the whole sort of middle path that the cooperative model takes. We can create wealth, but what's important is how we distribute it, and how transparent we are, and the fact that that wealth is controlled by a democratic process, not by some distinct ownership entity. So like that's a really, really important point. And that's but it's gonna take, I think, education to really tell that story, because a lot of people are generally familiar with the idea of cooperatives, but don't necessarily have a real intimate sort of understanding of how they work and the reasons for doing it this way, and the values that are underlying them. So
Sure.
That's going to take some education, and that could be podcasts, that could be conversations, I think, on the forum, that could be articles that may appear in Metapsychosis. I'd love to write a piece like on John Dewey's idea of creative democracy, for example, because Dewey's idea as well is that democracy is an ethos. Democracy is the way that we live. It's how we live in relationship to each other. It's not just our voting and so forth. So we should wrap it up, though. I want to get better at time management, and if I keep it under, an hour and a half, that's an improvement over over my batting average. So we'll do this again next week. Anybody watching this that's not on the call now, you're welcome to join. You can find out information on the Infinite Conversations forum, and go to the Cosmos Co-op channel, and pinned to the top you'll see the overview, and there will be a link as well to the upcoming Hangouts. And this, again, to reiterate, this is an open participatory process at this point, so we're exploring. We're going to concretize things, but it's okay just to listen. It's okay just to kind of be a fly on the wall or whatever you want to be. And that's it. That's all I have.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Marco.
Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Cheers.